Welcome to Culture at Work, the podcast that explores how to maintain a strong corporate culture in a rapidly changing world. I'm your host, Tim Carroll, inviting you to learn from industry leaders on how to build an exciting culture to bring people back to the office and inspire them like never before. On today's broadcast, we thought we'd have a little fun and bring together the highlights of our first season. From a wide range of experts on the keys to building positive, productive, and engaging culture at work. Let's start with renowned speaker, author, and coach Willie Spears and the mentality of entitlement that he feels is affecting many of our businesses post-pandemic.
When we try our best to provide a harmonious culture, especially coming out of COVID, now we're going over the top to make sure everyone feels comfortable. When you talk about work-life balance, when you talk about making sure you look out for them outside of work and not overworking them and caring about them as a person, all those things. Well, now they become entitled. These were extra things. Now they're the norm.
So now more than ever, says Spears, it's important to talk with your employees, engage candidly, and consistently measure your organization, because what gets measured gets done.
And if you don't have great communication in your organization, you will not be able to measure. And so to answer your question, the way that I believe you measure is you have strategic questions to ask your organization on the front end, on the back end, and you do it often. You measure often, and they're going to tell you. And so this is the last one, Tim. This is the hardest question. If you could make more money, would you work somewhere else? No one wants to ask that question.
That's right.
Right. So there's ways to do it. You don't want to ask that in front of everyone. You don't want, but there's that question needs to be asked twice a year to everyone in your organization. If they doubled your salary, we don't want you to turn that down. We get it. But if you're going to make a little bit more money, would you work somewhere else? And if the answer is yes, we need to know why. We need to know why. Could you imagine dating someone, Tim, and she said, "Look, would you be upset if in a few years I found someone better and I just moved on?" No, you would say, "Well, why not make this better?" Like what are you looking? Well, what's going on? And so they have to have the mentality, I'm going to make this the best place to work, so I don't ever want to leave.
And that, says Spears, is how you work to lessen a growing sense of entitlement and create the much healthier and productive culture with what he calls an owner's mentality.
Entitlement seeps in like a cancer. And if you don't cut it out, it's going to eat away at your entire organization. Everything from how come we don't have parking spaces here? How come I had to walk this far? Why didn't you pay for my food on the last trip? All these things that you were doing to show them you appreciate them, sometimes they feel like you owe me that. And that person has a worker mentality, not an owner's mentality. The owner mentality says, I'm not entitled. I don't care how much money I have. I got to go get it every single day. That's the owner mentality. The worker mentality is, I'm just here punching a clock and they better treat me this way, this way, this way, this way. And you need people around you that have an ownership mentality. Even if they don't ever plan to be an owner, they need to think like, this is my business. This is our business, not it's Tim's business and I'm working for Tim. No, I'm working with Tim, and together we're going to take this thing to another level.
Taking things to another level segues nicely into our discussion with Chester Elton, an organizational strategist and co-author of best-selling books such as All In and Leading with Gratitude. To get to the next level, Chester emphasizes the importance of a culture built on emotional connection and sincerity.
In great cultures, it's not just what you do and how you do it, it's why do you do it. There's an emotional connection to work. And not just an emotional connection to maybe your products and services. There's an emotional connection to each other. We're not going to let each other down. We're going to build each other up. We're going to support each other. And that's what's been so great about the research we did for All In, because you talk about work that matters, people that matter to you, right? And how do you engage, enable, and energize each other was the core of what we determined was the All In roadmap. And, we talk about engagement all the time, but enablement, are we supporting each other? And then that energy, that what we do really does make a difference, right?
He also encourages a culture of gratitude and recognition where when someone goes above and beyond and does a great job, you recognize it immediately and for all to hear.
Well, when you see that, you bring the team in and say, you know what, team, I got to tell you, I saw Tim in action today. And there was a customer that came in, and I wasn't sure if we were going to have to call 911 or what, but that customer was hot, And by the time they left, and here's what Tim did. And you know what that is? That's extraordinary customer service. Is that one of our core values? Absolutely. You want to know what extraordinary customer value looks like? Look no further than Tim. You can do that in a minute. You can do that in a minute. And the whole team gets the message. Tim feels great. I'm using you as an example because I'm sure you're an extraordinary customer service rep,
Thank
right?
you. Thank
Yeah,
you.
and it lifts the whole team. I didn't write him a check. I didn't give him a promotion. I just called it out.
But when an employee doesn't work out, and for one reason or another, their values just don't line up with those of the organization, don't try to be a savior. Simply acknowledge the mistake and make the change.
I think leaders so often have a savior complex, and they'll have somebody on their team, right? And it's not working out and they're not producing, and they're convinced that they can turn it around and they can get them passionate. They can, and sometimes you just can't,
I've been
just
accused of that over the years. I've done that early on. Yeah, I thought I
yeah.
could change people.
Well, and here's what happens. Initially you don't have a good fit on your team, and friction starts to happen, right? The values don't align, the work ethic, whatever it is. Initially, your team goes, okay, that person's out of line, and if you want to use the word blame, right? They blame that person, not a good fit. Well, the longer it goes on, and the more you try to save them and keep working around them and making them the exception, then the blame transfers from the problem child to you, the leader. And that's very dangerous
Hmm.
because now you start to lose the team.
With acclaimed author Corey Carlson, author of Win It Home First, we expand the discussion about culture to highlight the importance of a winning culture in the workplace, but also at home.
Whatever you want your culture to be in your house, it starts with you. So if you want a family culture of generosity, well, you need to be being generous and talking about how you gave extra tip to the waitress, talking about how you're giving a percentage of your income to a church or to a nonprofit, or how, whatever that may be. If you want it to be one of kindness, well, don't let your kids see you give the middle finger on the road or honking aggressively. So I think for any of the individuals listening on to this podcast, whatever you want your family to be, make sure you're doing it. More is caught than taught in our families, and we need to make sure we're doing that.
And add to that intentionality. The intentionality you have at work, have it at home as well.
I just love the word intentional, and I think that, that's exactly it, is that intentionality that we have at work to put together a compelling vision statement and clear values, that the intentionality that we have to have one-on-one meetings with our employees, the intentionality we have to have a leadership retreat or quarterly meetings, that same intentionality we need to be applying to our home. So have you created vision and values for your family? Do you have one-on-one meetings with your kids and with your spouse? And how does that look like? Well, it's a date. Have you been on a date with your spouse? Have you been on dates with your kids? Like for me, that's me and my son going and playing catch, and I'm having intentional conversations while we're throwing the football. Me going having coffee or ice cream with my daughters. And then for me and my wife, we need to do 2 dates a month. And so it's being intentional with one-on-one meetings, being intentional with quarterly meetings. So it's vacations. I want to do one overnight trip with each of my kids a year. So I get that intentional time. So it can be done for sure. We just got to be intentional with it. And Tim, one thing I'll share a lot with clients, because I got to remind myself, is our day does not end when we walk through the front door.
Right.
Our day ends when our head hits the pillow. So for that leader, when you get in, you walk through that front door, don't stop. Just keep going. Do the dishes, serve, ask the questions, be empathetic, be active listening. Like all the things we do from 8 to 5, we got to continue doing that until our head hits the pillow.
Of course, it's hard to talk about the workplace and culture without incorporating the growing impact of AI. For that, we turn to seasoned entrepreneur and teaching professor at the University of Missouri, J. Scott Christensen. People do believe this. Do you think that AI is eventually going to take over the workplace and start to have, this machine learning just ultimately, sure, it's already taken over some jobs, but just kind of take over the workplace? There's fear that, the machines will rise up.
Um, no, I don't think so. But I think if I had certain functions that were very formulaic, if that was my job, my job was to write Instagram posts for a company, I would probably be a little worried because I could feed all the previous Instagram posts for this company that were effective into these LLMs. So I use this as an example. Now write 100 posts about these topics, and I'm going to upload a spreadsheet for you. And you could get all that work done in an hour or two, or maybe a minute or two.
And moving forward, where does Professor Christensen see the real impact of AI in the workplace?
Well, I hope that we see something a little bit more like a Star Trek level AI. This assistant that's actually a valuable assistant for doing calculations, for doing synthesizing of data, for comparing and going through large data sets, for being able to do all sorts of work, and changing our work toward more of the one-on-one relationships that we have with people in our workplace. Because one of the things about those studies I mentioned at the very beginning of our conversation here is that when they looked at writing, they found that the creativity of how things were described did increase, but there was no increase in no new ideas. So the novelty, which is different than creativity, but the novelty, something new, that is not enhanced yet by AI without at least there being some human in the middle of that.
Next up, we have Pat Ivers, founder and president of Continuum Media, a national television advertising platform. With more than 60 employees and offices in 4 different cities around the globe, he worked hard to find the right way to bring people back to the office and make it make sense to his team.
I'm like, I really want everybody back 4 days a week, and they almost burned down the building. So I said, okay, can it be 3 days, can it be 2 days? And they are different office to office. So in Denver, it's 3 days a week. In New York, it's 3 days a week, but they have an alternate. They get to pick their third day. And then in Cardiff, it's the same thing. It's 2 days a week, although they tend to come in more than that. The one thing we did across all offices is I need everybody in on Tuesday and Wednesday. And that allowed us to at least have in-person meetings. We knew that teams were all together. It was much easier.
Yeah.
Zooms were conference room to conference room as opposed to a bunch of people on the call. And then when we were in there, we turned to the managers or the leaders of the departments and said, okay, what are you going to do to provide value to your team? This is a great day to train them. I don't want people to come in and be in 8 hours of meetings. But how do you foster camaraderie amongst your team and amongst a larger team? And it could be meals, it can be meetings, it can be as much as get out of your office and go out and sit and talk to people that don't necessarily work directly for you. Ask how they're doing. Get to know. Schedule cross-team meetings. Let's really understand what other teams are doing. And have those conversations, and we encourage it all the time. Please have them out loud on the floor so that other people hear it and can chime into it. Because one of the things that happened during COVID is everybody got so removed and so isolated, it was really hard and almost uncomfortable to get them to talk again beyond the scope of their immediate need or team, et cetera, et cetera. So there's been a lot of things like that. Get outside. In Denver, we have an outside space, so it's nice. Bring your team outside, sit outside, take it in. But it's just intentional about what are you doing. And then, one of our organizational goals is just to continuously drive improvement in our environment and our culture. And what does that mean? And trying to identify it. And so we talk about those things all the time. How do we drive creativity? How do we drive job satisfaction? Just what does that mean? Do we even understand that as a company?
He also invested in improving the office space, more natural light, plants, common places for social meetings. But at the same time, he reminded the employees they have an obligation to the company as well.
the one thing that everybody has in common is they appreciate flexibility today. I mean, doesn't matter how old you are, you appreciate having the opportunity. Look,
Right.
everybody that works for me is these are all adults, and the one thing we always talk about is personal accountability in a workplace. So if you need more time to go do something, I trust that you've made that decision. I'm not gonna, that's why you're hired. You're hired to make big decisions every day. And I'm
Right.
not going to police those, and we don't police those. But I think trying to let everybody know there's also an obligation that comes with that freedom. That maybe is, I can only imagine some people are going to listen to this podcast that work for me and come in and just read me the riot act for saying it. That is something that we need to impose upon and teach to newcomers to the workplace. That you do have a responsibility, that you do have look, I, as a business owner, have an obligation to you, but you have an obligation indirectly to me, but an obligation to your teammates here and the business and the clients that pay our bills.
Love it. That's great. With great power comes great responsibility. I think it's from Spider-Man. All right. Continuing the back to the office theme is seasoned Nashville real estate expert, Doug Ryan, who told us the key to recruiting and retaining young employees today and getting them to come back to the office is providing convenience and amenities.
Recruit and retain is the focus. And today, and how it differs from 10 or 15 years ago, is that they're focused on amenities for their employees, like walkable, so you don't have to get in your car. We use a term in the business, commodity office. If you've heard that, it's picture Cool Springs, mid-rise office building surrounded by a sea of parking that you have to get in your car and drive somewhere to get a sandwich, to grab a cup of coffee, maybe to work out, or like that. To me, I think commodity office around the world is going to struggle. And today, these fringe locations that have been developed, like these Gulch neighborhoods, for example, North Gulch, Midtown, Music Row, you're getting not just Class A office that are built in these locations, but you're getting retail and eating and dining and beverage, everything walkable. And then the whole piece of sustainability comes into play too. Corporations, trying to communicate their brand and their culture, want to be sustainable because it's what the young kids, what are we on? It's not Gen Z. It's not millennials. Well, I don't even know where we are, but whatever they're called, the environment's important to them.
In tech.
Yeah, exactly. So it's important. And so those are kind of the criteria of what they're looking for today.
And Ryan believes, while the hybrid work schedule is clearly here to stay, the best culture, or the strongest culture, the most dynamic culture is still built interacting face to face in the office.
I think it depends on the organization, but I would say broadly, it has to happen in person. And I think most of my clients are struggling with how to maintain or build further their culture. Or in the case of, Asurian, they were decentralized and they felt like they wanted to redefine their culture, and they chose to build a headquarters and locate everybody together. And so culture can happen when you're together, for sure. There are probably entrepreneurial segments of companies and maybe music industry where they can be a little more remote, but certainly when it comes to creative process, you got to be together.
But of course, all this talk about culture, work schedules, amenities, and more means nothing unless you know how to attract top talent to begin with. For that, we turned to veteran recruiter Marilyn McSweeney, president and CEO of the McSweeney Group, who told us for today's employees, the company's core values, mission, and purpose are key. They want to know that the work they do every day matters.
It's the company's why, if you will. They want to feel like they're with a company that their efforts matter, not just to themselves or to the employer, but it helps the community in some way. It helps the end users feel that the employees at your end users feel that you've invested in them by having a purpose of work, philanthropic efforts, and just like you have a reason to be there, I would say is number one that has particularly shifted over the years.
And equally important and always a top issue, she says today's employees do not want to be micromanaged.
That inevitably comes up in every ask. So I would ask employers to do some self-evaluation and poll their team. And if they're getting some feedback that they feel like they're micromanaged versus giving clear expectations, um, it and results, then you're going to have, well, we're probably not going to take you on as a client, but you're going to have a really difficult time hiring. So, no micromanagement and purpose of work would be my top two answers.
So, a truly amazing first season for our Culture at Work podcast. We want to thank all our guests for their time, expertise, and insight into this rapidly changing work world. And we want to thank you for listening. Of course, this is just the beginning. There is a whole new season right around the corner, and we can't wait to share that with you soon. For now, I'm Tim Carroll of Working Spaces. Great to be with you. Look forward to talking again in season 2.